Welcome to the Pasadena Festival of Women Authors 2021 online. Hello, I'm Nora Morley, the chair of the festival. I'd like to thank our committee of volunteers who have worked so hard to bring you our fabulous 2021 authors in video presentations like this one. A unique aspect of our festival is that our authors share their journey as a writer and as a woman. In addition to providing a platform for women authors, we make grants to literary programs. Our recent program grants were made to Pasadena City College, Writer in Residence, Visiting Writer and Summer Writing Academy. Pasadena Public Library, One City, One Story. Pasadena Senior Center, Masters in Learning. PEN America Emerging Voices Fellowship, and the Right Girl Mentoring Program. To all of our donors, thank you for your generous support, and a special thank you to our community sponsors, starting with our lead sponsor, Clifford Swan Investment Counselors, where investment counseling is so much more than finances. It's providing wisdom for generations. And our publisher level sponsors, BNY Mellon Wealth Management and Payden Regal Investment Management. And our sponsors at the editor level and at the novel level. We are so happy that we've been able to bring our 2020 and 2021 authors to you with our online festivals. We look forward to seeing you in person on March 19th, 2022 at the Pasadena Convention Center with more fantastic women authors. And now, enjoy this author's story.
Hello, my name is Betty Sargent, and I am here to introduce the remarkable author Lydia Millet and her most recent novel, A Children's Bible. So what's so remarkable about Lydia? Well, for one thing, she has written 12 highly acclaimed novels and short story collections. A Children's Bible was a 2020 finalist for the National Book Award and named one of the 10 best books of the year by the New York Times. Her collection, Love in Infant Monkeys, was shortlisted for the Pulitzer Prize. In discussing A Children's Bible in a recent LA Times interview, Carolyn Kellogg says, "It's not for children, and it's not a Bible. It's the story of a younger generation at odds with its elders, set in the near future when environmental calamity throws American society into chaos." In describing Millet's work, Salon says, "The writing is always flawlessly beautiful, reaching for an experience that precedes language." Ron Charles of the Washington Post says Millet writes brilliantly about everything: politics, physics, mermaids, and she is one of the leading writers of environmental fiction today. She's also ferociously witty. That rare combination has made her stories about species extinction and global warming profound and weirdly amusing. A Children's Bible is a blistering little classic, he says. It's Lord of the Flies for a generation of young people left to fend for themselves on their parents' rapidly warming planet. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Lydia Millet.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I feel my head has swollen out of control and is now very large due to all the kind words. But I'm really happy to be here.
Well, and we are thrilled to have you. It's wonderful to have you as a part of this, and we really look forward to what you're going to tell us about your book. Thanks.
Like most of my colleagues in the realm of cultural and artistic production, as we go about trying to publicize the things we've written or painted or filmed or sang or built, I've been asked several times over the years where I get my ideas. A fair and forthright question with the best of intentions. And yet it struck me as I sat down to prepare a talk for you. I've stubbornly avoided answering it. I've hemmed and hawed and evaded, sometimes annoyingly. I've seen now and then some irritation on the usually friendly faces of audience members. My responses to the query have not proved helpful in the past. Maybe I thought, now's the moment to make a clean breast of it. So, my earliest memory of being alone in an idea factory dates back to when I was 2, a toddler, technically. Now, I know some folks don't approve of that kind of preschool exposure, from protective mothers and fathers wishing only to promote their children's welfare, to nonprofit organizations given over to the cause. There are numerous interests dedicated to halting the practice of allowing vulnerable children to enter the factories alone, both here at home and abroad. A central argument of such groups is that the idea factories simply aren't safe for our little ones. The creatures may suffer as a result of frequent, prolonged, or even one-time rapid exposure. Since the mind of a human child is deeply porous, like a sponge, and if infused too quickly with a powerful idea that looms unbidden out of a seemingly innocuous factory space, may be adversely affected. There was a wide array of cautionary tales. One small child in suburban Topeka, for instance, was suddenly confronted with idea number 43642D, giraffes have very long black tongues, and entered a dreamlike, nearly catatonic state characterized by repeated extensions of his own tongue out of his mouth. The tongue was made to snake around outside the mouth, exploring and luxuriously touching chin and cheek regions. At inopportune moments, including but not limited to mealtimes, when the tongue was occupied by food. All of which culminated in an escapade involving the self-inflicted application of permanent black marker, known as Sharpie, to not only the youngster's tongue, but his lips, nose tip, and insides of his nostrils. Another unfortunate, a 3-year-old living in Belgium, sidled up unsuspecting to idea number 889, your parents kiss when naked, and was severely traumatized. These idea accidents are just the tip of a hulking and massive iceberg. Unfortunately, we can never know exactly what the long-term effects of a preschool age foray into a factory may be. There's no control group. We can't say with any degree of certainty that children exposed at, say, age 1 or 2 are universally more harmed, or for that matter, benefited by such misadventures than children first exposed at 4 or 5. And efforts to control the flow of ideas at the source have been largely unsuccessful. In the age of digital technology, of social media and widespread internet usage, we've seen, if anything, an efflorescence of idea factories, to which our youngsters' freewheeling access has steadily increased. Parental controls only go so far when it comes to the factories. Various political and economic schemes have also been suggested for reducing the risks to the very young, including the separation of idea factories into categories. One facility might be dedicated to ideas concerning only stuffed animals, for instance, or small plastic replicas of dinosaurs, or toothpaste, or more broadly, oral hygiene, an idea that presents us with many challenges in bringing up our offspring. On the other end of the spectrum, an R or X-rated factory might be limited to a subset of ideas that, though out of delicacy, I won't mention them by name, are fully inappropriate for innocent, budding psyches. The notion being that children's incursions into the factories, as into the cinemas, could then be regulated with greater specificity. But as psychologists and think tanks have pointed out, such schemes run counter to the very nature of ideas. The heterogeneity of ideas, which, as we know, follow a process of invention, much like cellular division or botanical reproduction, separating, replicating, and metastasizing, say, or pollinating and sprouting and then pollinating again, even cross-pollinating willy-nilly, is at once their glory and their intractability as a social dilemma. And needless to say, the factories oppose such external constraints. Their claim, which does seem to be supported by a preponderance of evidence, is that you can't predict ahead of time where the purest and boldest, or often entirely separately, most popular ideas will originate. To give an idea factory a single restricted mandate is to hobble the conceptual enterprise from the get-go. selected examples. One of the top 20 ideas of all time, number 4 on the global list that's so carefully curated by the good people at UNESCO, everything is better with sex, actually came from a one-man shop in Uttar Pradesh, which had formerly produced mostly ideas about subjects like cement manufacture, textiles, and ornamental brassware. Whereas the all-time number 3, the simple but perfectly formulated "God listens when you cry," which even the most stupidly ignorant among us are now familiar with, was manufactured on an assembly line. Little known fact. And a minor spin-off of number 3645E, which, if I call correctly, goes, "It wasn't me who did it, but the Dark Lord Satan," emerged from an unlicensed so-called wildcat outfit operating out of a 2-car garage in Birmingham, Alabama. My point is, it's almost impossible to chart the growth and development of an idea and its subsidiary ideas. Their genesis remains mysterious. When I told you that I went into a factory unchaperoned at the age of 2, I suspect some among you were shaking your heads. Sorry, but that's borderline abusive, you may have been thinking. Others may have rendered an even harsher judgment, that my parents should have had their custody removed, been brought up on criminal charges, etc. I hasten to assure you their motives were sound and their nurturing instincts intact. It was, however, the 1970s. It's true that my recollection of the episode is hazy. I remember odd, lumpish creatures that were humanoid, yet also inhuman, and at the same time, curiously endearing. Fuzzy, with large eyes and a few straggling hairs on their bright yellow heads. I careened at one point, my chubby little legs trundling, my stunted-looking arms windmilling as I struggled to keep my balance, toward a vat of what I believed was a magic sauce, but may have been anything from honey to an industrial-strength adhesive. My diaper sagged unpleasantly. No one was present to prevent any of this. As I clutched at random ideas in that strange place with my stubby and sticky fingers, any number of horrific mishaps might have taken me down. It's only out of sheer dumb luck that I toddled out of the factory again with merely superficial psychological contusions and come to sit before you here today. In my own case, a case involving, from some perspectives, an irresponsibly premature, unmonitored ingression into a factory, I can only say this. While there may have been what the military likes to call collateral damage, that is, negative side effects resulting from a tactical action, there does appear to also have been a positive impact as well. On the one hand, I was eventually able to become, though not a producer of ideas myself, that honor goes solely to the factories, a vessel for their dissemination and embellishment. As a fiction writer, I function as an idea dispersal vehicle. On the other hand, the ideas that I find myself in a position to disperse are clearly predetermined, formed, and sadly limited by the history of my personal encounters with them, and equally by my lack of encounters with other ideas. To pose a somewhat cliched counterfactual, how much more powerful, how much more eloquent or mainstream or revolutionary might I have become as an idea disperser if I had not entered a factory circa age 2 without my adult handlers? Or if I'd entered, instead of a Dr. Seuss type factory, another kind of factory altogether, say a factory inspired by George Washington memorabilia. Or by the propaganda machine of Soviet Russia. The permutations are endless, for me, as for all other idea dispersers, who, needless to say, include every member of this audience, as we're all idea dispersers, whether formally and profitably in our professional careers, or on the more informal and less profitable basis known as life. So far, I've referred mostly to what the scholars call word ideas, since those are my specialty. There exists, of course, an abundance of different idea commodities: picture ideas, music ideas, and number ideas, to name but an obvious few. The list goes on and on. Many, but not all, of these other ideas can also occur in word form. or be represented in whole or in part by words. Words are the lingua franca, if you'll forgive the pompous Latin phrase, of the idea economy, and as such, tend to dominate the marketplace. Now, this is not to say that word ideas are a superior form. The saying, "a picture is worth 1,000 words," itself manifestly a word idea, expresses the well-established truism that sometimes words are less powerful than images in transmitting a given idea. So too the proverb dispersed by a 17th century Englishman named William Congreve that goes, "Music hath charms to soothe the savage breast." Music, like pictures, can do what words by themselves cannot. Recently, we've come to witness a proliferation of non-word ideas, picture and music ideas, certainly, owing to our current platforms of information and entertainment, but also with far direr consequences, power and hate ideas. Indeed, some commentators on our culture have noticed a marked decline of late in our public discourse of the word-idea connection, where words have increasingly been deployed, they suggest, not to promote our better ideas at all, but rather to silence, distort, or confuse them. This trend, they warn, is linked to the ascendancy of power and hate ideas, amorphous and frequently treacherous ideas, entangled with and constructed by words, and yet at the same time deeply disrespectful of their meanings. Over the old-fashioned, quaintly authentic word ideas that in both our loftier and our more difficult moments in history have guided us so skillfully through dangerous shoals. Which brings us to the question of how to manage adult encounters with ideas. Because as children, we have limited agency in our choice of idea venues. As children, we're in a sense the hapless captives of adults, whether our guardians are parents, teachers, librarians, or other authority figures. They play a primary role in steering us towards specific factories and idea genres, and if we're lucky, away from the most harmful of these. But when we gain our independence from those parents and teachers, at least in theory, we're free to pursue ideas of our own choosing. This, I'm afraid, is where the rubber hits the road. This is where we can make deadly mistakes, or on the bright side, meet with thrilling successes, be they great or small. For as adults, we can seek out new ideas in liberation and with curiosity. Or we can simply continue, much like children, to allow ideas to be thrust upon us and passively receive them. This default strategy, tragically, has grown all too common. While many of the groups concerned with children's exposure to ideas tend to overlook is this deeply distressing fact. The world of idea factories is every bit as hazardous for the old as it is for the young, possibly more so. And for this reason, as grown people, we have no access anymore to the mechanisms of parental control. Our guides and teachers desert us. Our work is done, they say, rubbing their hands briskly when we turn 18 or 21. With that, they leave us out in the cold to pick our way through the vast minefields of ideas, all by ourselves. Minefields that often lack signposts or even the most basic warning labels. And on those killing fields, we may be ambushed by malformed or rudimentary ideas, cruel or selfish ideas, ideas that seem to uplift us, but in reality push us face down into a sucking mud. Seductive ideas that trick us into smugness, envy, or conceit. Ideas that lead us into dead ends or fill our hearts with anger or empty pride. Ideas that promise everything but deliver nothing. Ideas that turn us away with coldness and calculation from the idea of ideas themselves. Thus, it falls to us as adults to ask ourselves that brilliant question that I've been asked so many times, and I'm struggling so mightily to answer for you now. Where do we get our ideas? And more important still, who's manufactured these ideas for us, and why? It falls to us as grown people and as citizens to ask and try to answer that elegant and piercing question constantly, to hold each idea up to the light, to try to see every single one for what it truly is, to ask ourselves not only where we got the idea, but also how good is this idea really? How strong and resilient, how lovely, and how kind. To ask ourselves, did I actually seek out this idea I'm holding close? Or was it slipped to me quite underhandedly, like so much Rohypnol at a seedy bar? But I digress. For my goal today is simply to answer the question of where I get my own ideas, modest ideas for the most part. And as you probably sensed by now, the answer is frankly disappointing. I get them from the very same factories where everyone else gets theirs. That's the unvarnished truth. In the past, when I was asked the question, I may have avoided answering for a shameful reason, namely not wishing to admit that the ideas I'm personally in the business of dispersing are in fact freely available and ambient in the air we breathe. They originate in the factories, to be sure, but as soon as they exist, become common property. And therefore, finally, are not my own ideas at all. To those looking for tips as to where the quality factories are, how and when to gain access to them, and methods for culling the best ideas they have to offer from the everyday dross of mediocrity, I'd say the where is less important than the why and how. But still, as to the where, because I don't mean to weasel my way out of that one, I'd offer that in my own journeys to the factories, in the particular course of my own research and inquiries, I found the most excellent and creative facilities are hiding in plain sight. They may look to the untrained eye like a humble bodega, a conversation with a friend or spouse. Possibly a factory will take the form of an awkward dinner party or rise up from a half-forgotten dream. A lonely moment in a car, stopped at a traffic light, a forest or a beach, a bird sitting atop a cage, or a dog dressed up as a rabbit. Even, dare I say it, a book. Many of those kinds of factories exchange ideas among themselves without so much as a memorandum of understanding, a non-disclosure agreement, or a short-form contract. They engage in a splendid miscegenation of thought and feeling that swells between them and multiplies and creates ideas anew, or cloaks the old ideas in a resplendent glow. Personally, I've found tremendous ideas lurking in many a text that, if I'm being honest, I barely understood at all. We all have our favorites in the world of ideas. We attach ourselves to them, or we attach them to us. The key, I suspect, to our discovery of ideas, our selection of preferred ideas, and also our presentation of those ideas to our readers, family and friends, or greater communities, is love. For once we devote ourselves to a given idea, there's little anyone else can do to pry it out of our grasp. So in my view, our task, our sovereign duty, whether in our roles as writers, doctors, grocery store baggers, stay-at-home moms, insurance claims adjusters, or indeed even voters, is first to look very closely at every idea we find to ensure that each of them is worthy of our love. And then, having done so, to take the ones we love most and put them together, fashion from them a vision of what could be, of the emergence of the finest idea of any of them, still to come, still to be seen and known, still to be realized.
Lydia, that was absolutely astounding, brilliant. Thank you so much. I'm just breathless. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Well, thank you. You're really kind.
And now we have some questions from our audience. I hope you're okay with a few questions. They should be, I hope, clear and maybe simple. And so we're going to turn it over to our audience.
Hi, Lydia. I'm Amy Ulmer. I'm on the author selection committee from the festival, and thank you for that terrific talk. So I understand that you have 13 books, novels under your belt. So we're really curious, what's number 14 going to be about?
That is a good question, because actually the book I'm working on now is not fiction. It's this sort of hybrid of something like memoir and meditations on our love for the natural world and our love of animals and pets and each other, and sort of also a bestiary. So I'm calling it a bestiary. It's called We Loved It All, a bestiary. So it in some way mimics the medieval bestiaries of the church, in which animals sort of presented these moral fables for people, sort of were illustrations of biblical, of parables and virtues and that kind of thing. So it's this odd nonfiction, creative nonfiction book. Although I also have finished a novel called Dinosaurs, which is a short, really small novel about a lonely, wealthy man who sort of falls in love with the family next door to him. So I have those two books coming up sometime.
That sounds great. We'll look forward to reading them. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ruby. I'm a Right Girl alum, and my question for you today is, the children are dismissive of their parents and play a game hiding their parentage. Why did you choose to have hapless and clueless, self-centered parents?
So first of all, the parents are sort of my own generation. So it's a little bit of a self-criticism. Also, really, this is a tale of sort of generational divide and a story about the anger of the young at the inaction and passivity of the older in acting to preserve a future for them. And so, I don't sort of hold my generation fully responsible for all that has gone awry with our climate and the natural world and the extinction crisis. But I do think that we missed a really crucial window in which we could have really acted to promote the quality of life of our children and their children. And so it was kind of natural to write about my own generation, so 50 somethings, 40 somethings, some of these parents, as sort of ne'er-do-wells who have been not evil but self-indulgent in the way they really treated their role as parents, not only as the parents of their own children, but also as the parents of the world to come. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's really profound.
I wasn't sure if I actually answered your question, but.
Hi, I'm Grace. I'm a Right Girl alum. My question for you today is, the children in the novel are a lot more adult than their parents. Do you think that this is the fate of children of this current generation?
I guess you could say I hope it's the fate, but also I am inspired by people like Greta Thunberg. But not only are there so many, she's just easy to cite, but there are so many younger people, not necessarily children, but teenagers and people in their 20s and 30s right now that I see out in the world who are genuinely passionate and hard ass, if I can say that on the radio. No, I know we're not on the radio, but anyway, who just are really hardcore in the way they're coming across about the climate crisis. And I do feel that these younger people in general, actually have a more realistic and less denialist or dismissivist take on the urgency of the crises that we're facing. And it also, of course, have a real incentive to preserve the world for themselves because of the time frame that we're going to see changes on. So yes, I do really think that that the young are in some ways right now more mature about our life support crises than older generations, more mature and wiser.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Of course. Well, you can, as far as I'm concerned, you can.
Yeah, you absolutely can, Grace. Please do.
Cool. If you were the age of your 12 wonderful protagonists, how do you think you would be taking the storm that occurs in your novel?
Well, you know, pretty much the way they do, I guess. I mean, I never actually in my own personal life harbored the kind of resentment toward my parents that they harbor, but I wouldn't be surprised if my children and their cohort harbored that resentment toward me in my generation. In fact, I think it's reasonable for them to do so. And of course, it's hard for all of us to act against these massive and vast systemic problems. It's incredibly difficult to tackle what seems abstract to us and what has to do with laws and policy and economics. And so any individual can be forgiven for, you know, for fear in the face of it, or for reluctance or a sense of fatalism, but we can't afford that on a larger scale, at a social scale. And so, yeah, I mean, I hope that I would have a kind of pure rage that I actually didn't have at their age, partly because there wasn't quite as huge. There are always reasons to be angry, and there's always dreadful systemic injustice and all of that. You know, there's always plenty to be angry about in the world and to fight for and against, but the sense of looming threat was not quite as vast when I was a teenager as it is now. We did do some. We were sort of. It was still the Cold War, you know, so we were afraid of nuclear Armageddon, and you know, I would argue there's still cause to fear that, but we didn't feel the weight of the climate and extinction crises pressing down on us quite as we all do now.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, Lydia. My name is Shelly Thompson. I'm on the executive committee of the festival. And first of all, I want to say how much I enjoyed your presentation. Well done. In your book, A Children's Bible, you have many allusions to biblical passages. Did you start out with that as your intention, or is it something that developed organically as you were writing the book?
So I'm trying to remember, actually, I have such a terrible memory. I'm trying to remember whether I always intended to have as many parallels and allusions as I ended up having. I think at one stage I actually had more, and there was a slightly weightier presence of obvious biblical allegory, especially Old Testament in the first part, but really it felt right to make that more impressionistic and gestural as I went along, and it's still pretty obvious at times, and I sort of play with the sort of greatest hits of the Old Testament that were presented to us, at least to my mother and her generation when they were young, in the form of these picture Bibles and Bible stories. So these sort of very canonical stories that we all were exposed to in one form or another, if we lived in these sorts of Christian American homes in the 50s and 60s, which were, you know, Noah's Ark, obviously, the parting of the Red Sea, Cain and Abel, things like that. So I tried to have a lighter touch as I went forward in revising the book, because it just started to seem like it was too mapped onto those stories for me. So actually what you read now is a less elusive version than what I started with. But I can't remember exactly at what point in thinking about the book I decided to make it, to sort of give it this skeleton of biblical story. I think all I was doing at the beginning was Noah's Ark, and then it sort of spun out from there. Because it's always handy for someone like me who's not that interested in plot. It's always handy to have someone else's plot to steal, right? So in this case, the Bible. Yeah.
Well done. Thank you very much.
Hi, Lydia. My name's Katie, and I'm a Right Girl alum. I'm wondering, who was the most difficult character to write in a children's Bible, and why?
Good question. I'm interested in that question. I just don't know how to answer it instantly. So I'm just gonna produce a series of words that are not an answer before I actually get to the answer, as I think. So, I mean, I know who my favorite character to write was Jack, and he was also the easiest because he's sort of loosely based on my son, although slightly, less bratty than my son can be at times, of course. And I mean, I guess I would say the most difficult character for people to read seems to be the owner, because I get so many questions about, what the owner equates to, and what does the owner mean, and who is the owner really, and is the owner God, or is the owner a capitalist, or what, I guess really for me, the key is always just nailing down the voice of a book, and that's what defines the whole book for me, and also the protagonist. And so I guess technically the hardest would have been Evie, because she tells the story, and when I was discovering what the book was, hers was the voice I had to figure out most immediately and had to be happy with, and probably the voice that took the most work, as I went along and as I revised the book. So I guess Evie is the answer. It's just that I think generally in terms of voice more than in terms of character, even though one constructs the other, obviously. So I always go at it from voice, and then the character just ends up being the sum total of, its articulations, right, as either interior monologue or dialogue. And yeah, so I come to character through voice. And so the answer is Evie, because her voice is the one that sort of decided what the book was going to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Those were brilliant answers to very good questions. You are an astounding author, and I'm really, really so happy that you've been a part of this for all of us. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It's been wonderful. And I would also like to thank our guest Zoom audience for your very intelligent questions, which, as I just said, were answered equally intelligently. The whole thing, this whole presentation, in my view, has been marvelous. We would like to remind our viewers, if they possibly could, to make a donation to the Pasadena Festival of Women Authors to help us in our mission with the authors. And we also want to remind you that you can buy a children's Bible from the website on the link that you will see at the bottom of the screen. And this has been a wonderful experience, certainly for me, and I think everyone who's been a part of it. And we really hope to see you again in 2022. Thank you.
It was really fun to do, and I'm actually glad that you guys urged me to write a talk, because I ended up having such a good time with it. And I do wish that I could be there in person, because I love coming to LA and I love coming to Pasadena. And so yeah, I hope I do get to meet you guys in the flesh at some point and come visit.